name is Bernhard Ruchti. I'm a pianist, organist and composer based in Switzerland, and today I'm going to be talking about one, if not the most significant source I know of when it comes to the question of historical tempi. It's the second part of my big A Tempo project, and this is about the music of Franz Liszt. The work I'm going to talk about is his big Fantasy and Fugue for organ on ad nos, ad salutarem, undam, or in a short version, just ad nos. He composed that work in 1850. It's one of the best organ works we have within the organ repertoire of the 19th century and maybe even in general. The work was performed on a very prominent occasion in 1855. It was the dedication concert of the new organ at Merseburg Cathedral near Halle in Saxony in Germany, where there was a new organ built by Friedrich Ladegast. That instrument was considered to be the most modern instrument of that time, and we know a lot about the instrument and particularly about its dedication concerts. Liszt's Fantasy and Fugue on ad nos was performed at that dedication concert, and usually this is the main topic people talked about in press reviews or letters or other documents after that dedication concert. So we know a lot about its interpretation, its character, its style, and how people reacted to it. And we know something else about it, and this is something really essential and exciting, and that is that we know the duration of that performance. We know how long that piece lasted. This is not totally unusual. We know that for several pieces in the 19th or even 18th century. The unusual thing is that in this case it's actually 4 sources who tell us the same thing. So the level of certainty is very high. So when it comes to that work, we are not talking about metronome markings as it was the case for the music of Beethoven. And this is probably a good thing, because if you have watched my introduction videos to my Beethoven recordings, you will know that there are mysteries connected to those metronome markings. This is not the case with ad nos, because a duration is a much more reliable information about tempo and music in general. So, the amount of time these sources tell us is 45 minutes. If you compare that to the average duration that piece has today, be it in concerts or in recordings, you will see that this average duration is about 30 minutes or even less. That means that there is a difference of our tradition today to the actual performance in 1855 of 15 minutes or even more, which is huge, of course. And it clearly brings to light that if we try to explore that interpretation in 1855, we are in fact exploring a new or a different aesthetic compared to that aesthetic we are used to today. As I've already said, there are numerous documents talking about that piece and talking about that particular performance at Merseburg Cathedral. And we know as much about this piece and its interpretation as probably about no other piece of music at all. And the fascinating thing is that if we combine that rich information we have about the piece with the actual music, with the information Liszt gives us when he, wrote the music down, we can come up with some really unique and exciting conclusions about that aesthetic, about that way of interpretation, about that performance practice. And of course, those ideas about music, those ideas about performance we learn about not only apply for that particular work, but for any organ music of that time. And since this organ work is of a very symphonic character, also for symphonic and orchestra music, and since this work is also of a very pianistic character, also about piano music. So it's actually like a window that opens up for us today and that allows us to have a direct and pure look into the performance practice of the 19th century. So it's something really extraordinary and fascinating. Now, the organ at Merseburg Cathedral I was talking about is still there. And fortunately, it's there with a high level of authenticity. And I'm very happy that I was able to do a recording of that Ad Nos Fantasy at the original organ at Merseburg Cathedral. And as far as I know, it's the first recording ever made that takes as a point of reference those very 45 minutes and actually achieves an interpretation of that piece that lasts for 45 minutes. So, if you listen to that recording, you will be able to experience the original sounds that also Franz Liszt and his pupils and the audience in 1855 experienced. And you will not only be able to experience the original sounds, but, as far as I know, for the first time in the history of recordings ever, you will also be able to experience the original dramaturgy of the piece. So it's really something fascinating and exciting. Since the level of certainty about that interpretation is so high, it allows us to get a really unique insight to Franz Liszt about music and to general musical ideas of the 19th century. And since this recording now is there, we can not only learn about that on a theoretical level, but we can actually experience that way of playing. We can sort of feel it, get an idea at what it does, how the phrasing is done, what it tells us about virtuosity, and lots of things like that. So, as I've said, it's a very lucky and exciting situation that we have here. And in this short introduction, I would like to talk in the next segment about the actual piece, about its composition, about that performance at Merseburg Cathedral, because this is one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of music I know of. In a third part, I will talk about the actual interpretation, about questions of tempo, etc. And in a fourth part, then about the organ at Merseburg Cathedral and the actual recording. So, in the next step, let's talk about that wonderful piece, which is Fantasy and Fugue on Ad Nos by Franz Liszt. Please subscribe to my channel, don't forget to like and ring the bell to get notified when there's any news.